What is going on, guys? Boom here. Throughout time and in every culture in the world, scary stories have been told, either around campfires or to satisfy a morbid curiosity we have as humans. The world is filled with a strange wonderment that leads us all to look beyond the veil of normality into the void of the unknown. I have 3 quick stories that might not all be scary, but are definitely strange. So join me on this journey as we begin this new series of Spooky Thursdays. How far down the rabbit hole are you willing to go? This story happened to me when I was either in 3rd or 4th grade. I was spending the night at my cousin's house. The location of the bed in the bedroom looked directly into the kitchen. Sometime late in the night, I awoke to the sound of nails clicking on hardwood floor. At the time, I had no idea what it was. It must have been a full moon night because the kitchen was lit very well by moonlight washing the area in a gray hue. The clicking of the nails on the floor continued, and after a few seconds of lying there, a creature passed in front of the door. Even though it was years ago, the memory of those creatures, yes, I said those, is still with me. If you grew up in the 90s, you would probably remember a cartoon named Gargoyles. That is kind of what the creatures looked like. They walked on the balls of their feet, their heel extended up at a 45-degree angle. They walked with their knees bent and had a flowing tail behind them. The creatures had bat-like wings extending out of their backs. Their heads were long like a horse, but more angular and harsh. 2 straight horns extended from the top of their heads. The creature's skin looked leathery and was a gray color, but that could have been because of the hue of the room. Being so young, I couldn't judge their height, but the tip of their wings came just below the top of the door as it passed. Back then I had no idea what they could have been, so I just closed my eyes really tight and I prayed they wouldn't come into the room. After a while, either the clicking stopped or I fell back asleep. I never encountered those creatures again, nor did I spend the night at that house again. Like I said back then, I had no idea what they could have been, but as an adult, I know exactly what they were. They were demons. This happened to me somewhere between 5th and 7th grade. I was sleeping in my bed at the house I grew up in East Texas. My bedroom looked directly into the living room, and a set of French doors were parallel to me. It must have been a full moon night because the moonlight flooded the room in a low white glow, making the living room very visible. As I did often back then, I awoke out of nowhere sometime in the middle of the night. I looked at my door, and standing there was a figure of a man leaning against my door frame. My initial reaction was that it was my dad because he wore a wide brim hat, but soon dismissed that because my parents were divorced. My mom had remarried years before, but this figure was much smaller than my stepdad. I honestly didn't feel threatened by the figure, but I must have looked at it for a few minutes and it never moved. Fearful it would realize I was looking at it, I squeezed my eyes shut and fell back to sleep. A couple years back, while listening to George Norrie on late night radio, I heard several stories of encounters with a figure who was just a man, shaped black figure like a shadow, wearing a wide brim hat. All these stories took place in the mid-90s. That was when I also encountered this figure. They all called him the Shadow Man. A year or 2 ago, I mentioned this incident to my mom, and she said she remembered me telling her about it the next day. I never seen the Shadow Man again. This happened to my dad a couple years back. My grandparents had moved into a single-wide trailer. My dad and stepmom had went over to the house to visit after work one day. They were all sitting outside, and being that it was summer and hot, my dad decided he wanted a beer. So while everyone conversed outside, my dad went inside to the kitchen. This is where it began to be weird. He noticed the house was really cold. The trailer did have an AC, but everyone was outside and the AC was off. When he had arrived earlier in that day inside the trailer, it was lukewarm at best, but now it was downright chilly. He shrugged it off and he headed into the kitchen and opened the fridge. After grabbing a beer, he closed the fridge. And at this moment, he felt like someone was watching him. So he turned around, and sitting on the couch directly behind him was a woman in a white cotton nightgown, staring directly at him. Her eyes were dark and cold, and not blinking. He began walking slowly towards the front door, and in his mind he kept repeating, "Do not run, do not run." Once back outside, he flopped into the nearest chair, not saying a word to anyone. However, everyone noticed the obvious distress on his face and how pale he was at that moment. My stepmom reported later that his face was so pale that he didn't even have color in his lips, like all the blood had drained out of his face. Yes, an old saying, but an accurate description of the horror he felt in his heart at the moment. After several minutes of silence, he began to tell everyone what he had seen inside the trailer. My grandmother also became quiet, and the blood seemed to drain out of her face. "What?" he asked. She began. "When we moved into the trailer, the landlord told us about a lady who lived here previously. One night while she was sleeping, she suffered a brain hemorrhage and died on that very couch. She was also wearing a white cotton nightgown."